The year was 1908, and deep beneath the sun-baked soil of Crete, an Italian archaeologist named Luigi Pernia made a discovery that would send shockwaves through the world of archaeology. As his fingers brushed away centuries of dirt, an object emerged unlike anything ever seen before. A small, round disk of fired clay, about the size of a dinner plate, covered on both sides with swirling symbols, spiraling inward like a labyrinth frozen in time. The Phaistos disk, as it came to be known, was instantly recognized as something extraordinary. But here's the thing: no one could read it. Those mysterious symbols, stamped into the clay over 3,700 years ago, held a message that remains undeciphered to this day. What was it trying to say? A royal decree, a religious hymn, or perhaps something far more unexpected? This isn't just another ancient artifact. The Phaistos disk is a riddle wrapped in clay, a puzzle that has stumped scholars for over a century. Imagine holding something in your hands that was last touched by human fingers when the pyramids of Egypt were still young, when the great palaces of Minoan Crete stood tall, when writing itself was still a newfound marvel. And yet, despite all our advancements, despite the countless codes and languages we've cracked, this disk refuses to give up its secrets. It's as if the past is staring back at us, daring us to solve its mystery. Why has this one object remained so stubbornly silent? And what would it mean if we finally heard its voice? That's the journey we're about to take together, a dive into one of archaeology's most tantalizing enigmas. We'll explore the wild theories, from ancient star maps to long-lost languages, and meet the brilliant minds who have spent their lives chasing answers. Some believe the disk holds the key to understanding an entire civilization, while others think it might rewrite the history of writing itself. But one thing's for certain: behind those cryptic symbols lies a story waiting to be told. So let's unravel the mystery of the Phaistos disk piece by piece and see if we can finally uncover the truth hidden for millennia. The ruins of Phaistos sprawled across a hilltop overlooking the fertile plains of southern Crete, a crumbling testament to the might of the Minoan civilization. It was here, among the remnants of grand staircases and faded frescoes, that Luigi Pernia carefully sifted through layers of ash and debris in the summer of 1908. His excavation team had been uncovering the ruins of the palace's basement storage rooms when a worker's trowel struck something unusual: not another broken pot or crumbling wall, but a flat, circular object buried beneath centuries of dirt. Pernia himself brushed away the dust to reveal a disk of baked clay, roughly 15 centimeters across, about the size of a modern dinner plate. Its surface was covered in an intricate spiral of symbols winding inward like the coils of a serpent. But what truly stunned scholars wasn't just the script itself, it was how it was made. Unlike carved inscriptions or handwritten texts, every single symbol on the Phaistos disk had been pressed into the clay using individual stamps, one character at a time. That made this artifact something unprecedented, the world's earliest known example of movable type, predating Gutenberg's printing press by over 3,000 years. Whoever crafted the disk had an entire set of stamped symbols at their disposal, carefully arranging them to form a message before firing the clay to preserve it. The precision was astonishing: 45 distinct signs appearing a total of 242 times across both sides, grouped into what seemed to be words or phrases separated by vertical lines. Some symbols look familiar: a helmeted warrior, a ship, a bee, while others remain utterly mysterious. But here's the real puzzle: no other artifact like it has ever been found. Not in Crete, not anywhere. This wasn't just a lone document, it was a technological marvel, a glimpse into a lost system of communication that vanished without a trace. So why was it here, buried in the ruins of a Minoan palace? Some believe it was a sacred object, perhaps a prayer or a hymn to the gods. Others think it might have been a royal decree stamped with authority. The truth is, we may never know, because unlike Egyptian hieroglyphs or Mesopotamian cuneiform, there's no Rosetta Stone for the Phaistos disk, no bilingual inscription to help crack its code. It stands alone, a silent message from a civilization that flourished and fell, leaving behind this single, stubborn enigma. And that's what makes it so tantalizing. It's not just about deciphering symbols. It's about reaching across millennia to hear a voice the world forgot. To understand the Phaistos disk, we first need to step back into the dazzling world of the Minoans, a civilization at its zenith around 1700 BC when this enigmatic object was crafted. Picture Crete as the beating heart of the Mediterranean, its palaces buzzing with merchants, artisans, and diplomats from across the ancient world. The Grand Palace of Phaistos, where the disk was discovered, wasn't just a royal residence, it was a crossroads of ideas, a place where Egyptian gold, Cypriot copper, and Aegean artistry mingled in a vibrant exchange of goods and culture. This was a society far ahead of its time, with advanced architecture, elaborate frescoes depicting bull-leaping ceremonies, and even flushable toilets, luxuries Europe wouldn't see again for millennia. Yet amid all this sophistication, writing remained rare. The Minoans used a script called Linear A, found on clay tablets mostly tracking inventories of grain, oil, and spices. But here's where the Phaistos disk shatters expectations. Unlike those straightforward accounting records, the disk's symbols aren't scratched hastily into clay, they're meticulously stamped, a deliberate and labor-intensive process reserved for something extraordinary. And that's what makes its isolation so baffling. Not a single other stamped artifact like it has ever surfaced, not in Phaistos, not in Knossos, not in any other Minoan site. It's as if this disk fell from another timeline. Nearby, archaeologists unearthed piles of linear tablets, their symbols flowing in handwritten lines. But the disk, its symbols march in perfect pressed formation, suggesting a purpose beyond mundane record-keeping. Was it a sacred object, its stamped symbols preserving a hymn too holy to write by hand? Or perhaps a diplomatic missive designed to impress foreign eyes with its technical brilliance? The contrast couldn't be starker. Linear tablets feel utilitarian, like grocery lists scratched on the back of envelopes. The Phaistos disk, though, it's a masterpiece, a carefully composed message meant to endure. Its very existence hints at a secret layer of Minoan culture, one we've barely begun to glimpse. So why was this radiant civilization so generous with its art and architecture, so stingy with its words? And why, in all their bustling trade and diplomacy, did they leave behind only this lone, whispered secret in clay? The disk doesn't just defy translation, it defies context, floating untethered in history, daring us to ask, what are we missing? The symbols on the Phaistos disk are where the mystery truly comes alive. Imagine unfurling that spiral of stamped clay into a straight line. You'd find 241 individual tokens, but here's the twist. They're made up of just 45 distinct signs repeated in careful patterns. It's like finding an ancient alphabet, but one where half the letters seem to belong to a language we've never heard. Some symbols leap out as eerily familiar: a warrior's helmet, a ship with sweeping prow, even what looks like a bee with delicately outlined wings. These could be echoes of the Minoan world, images plucked from frescoes or everyday life. But then there are the others, strange, geometric shapes that resist easy identification, like a branching tree with no leaves or a series of dots connected by lines resembling modern braille. Even more intriguing, the way they're organized. The disk's surface is divided by faint vertical lines into 31 sections, almost like stanzas in a poem. And within each, the symbols cluster in groups of 2 to 7, possibly forming words or phrases. The direction of writing seems clear. The outer edges of some symbols appear slightly squashed, as if the artisan pressed each stamp moving left to right, like a typewriter inching across the page. What's baffling is how some signs tantalizingly resemble characters from Linear A and B, the two known scripts of Bronze Age Crete. The plumed head symbol, for instance, looks strikingly similar to a linear logogram. Yet others are utterly unique, appearing nowhere else in the archaeological record. This duality fuels the debate: is the disk script a lost dialect, a ceremonial cipher, or something far more revolutionary? The repetition of certain symbols, like the walking man appearing 18 times, hints at grammatical structure, while the sheer variety suggests a vocabulary rich enough for complex expression. Then there's the spiral itself, winding inward like a coiled serpent. In Minoan art, spirals often symbolized eternity or cyclical renewal. Was this layout deliberate, turning the message into a visual metaphor? Or simply a practical choice to fit more text on a small surface? Every detail feels intentional. The B symbol always faces left, the shield symbol consistently tilts at the same angle. Even the spacing between groups is remarkably uniform. This wasn't haphazard stamping, it was a meticulous act of communication. Yet for all its precision, the disk's language remains just beyond our grasp, like hearing a song through a thick wall. The rhythm clear, but the words blurred. Perhaps the most haunting question isn't just what the symbols mean, but why they vanish after this single artifact. If stamping was this advanced, where are the other examples? It's as if we've found one perfect sentence from a forgotten library. Its shelves long turned to dust. For over a century, the Phaistos disk has been a magnet for the world's brightest linguists, archaeologists, and codebreakers, each convinced they could crack its secrets. Yet time and again, this unassuming clay circle has humbled even the most brilliant minds. The first serious attempt came from Sir Arthur Evans, the legendary excavator of Knossos, who discovered the disk just a year after Pernia's find. Staring at those strange symbols, Evans became convinced they were related to the Cretan hieroglyphs he'd uncovered, a script as baffling then as it is now. But side by side, the two writing systems refused to align. The hieroglyphs flowed in sweeping, organic strokes, while the disk stamps were angular and precise, like two languages separated by centuries of evolution. Evans died without solving the puzzle, leaving behind a chilling warning. We may have to accept that some ancient scripts will never yield their secrets. The next great hope came in the 1940s with Alice Kober, a Brooklyn College professor who revolutionized the study of undeciphered scripts. While others chased wild theories about Atlantis or extraterrestrials, Kober took a meticulous mathematical approach. Night after night, she filled index cards with painstaking frequency analyses of the disk symbols, searching for patterns that might reveal grammar, like which signs tended to start words or cluster together. Her work on Linear B would later prove foundational, but the disk resisted her methods. The symbols repeated in ways that defied linguistic logic, some appearing in isolation, others in long chains. Kober's frustration grew until her death in 1950, her notes ending with a rare moment of despair. This isn't a language, or if it is, it's one that plays by rules we don't understand. Then came John Chadwick, the Cambridge scholar who famously co-deciphered Linear B in 1952. If anyone could unlock the disk, it was Chadwick. His team had turned Europe's oldest readable script from gibberish into poetry. But after decades of effort, even he admitted defeat. The problem, he realized, wasn't just the lack of a bilingual text like the Rosetta Stone. Linear B had yielded because it recorded an early form of Greek, a known language family. The disk script shared only superficial resemblances with other Cretan writing, its symbols morphing unpredictably across the spiral. Chadwick's final paper on the subject reads like an archaeological white flag. Without new evidence, we are deciphering silence. What makes the disk so uniquely resistant? Modern codebreakers point to its statistical fingerprints. Natural languages follow predictable patterns, certain letters or syllables recur at steady rates. But the disk's symbol distribution is eerily flat, with no clear high-frequency letters like English's E or T. Some researchers suggest it might be a syllabary, where each symbol represents a syllable rather than a single sound. Others argue the repetitions hint at numerical or calendrical notations. The cruelest irony, the very feature that makes the disk extraordinary, those perfectly stamped symbols, eliminates the quirks of handwriting that often help identify individual scribes and their habits. The most tantalizing dead end came in 2014, when linguist Gareth Owens claimed a partial decipherment linking the disk to a Minoan fertility goddess. His team identified recurring sequences resembling the linear, a word for mother, sparking headlines worldwide, but peer review exposed fatal flaws. The same sequences appeared in contexts that made no thematic sense, like a modern sentence randomly inserting the word computer. It was a stark reminder: without context, even plausible guesses dissolve into speculation. The disk remains the ultimate locked room mystery, its clues scattered across millennia, its key potentially lost forever. Yet somehow, that very impossibility keeps drawing new generations of scholars back to its spiral, each certain they'll be the one to finally make clay speak. The symbols on the Phaistos disk don't just defy translation, they've sparked a century-long war among linguists over what language they might even represent. At the heart of the debate are three fiercely contested theories, each with passionate defenders and glaring holes. The first camp argues the disk encodes an early form of Greek, a precursor to the Linear B script deciphered in the 1950s. Proponents like Gareth Owens point to recurring symbol sequences that loosely mirror Linear B terms for mother and lord, suggesting a 70% overlap with known Greek roots. But skeptics fire back with a devastating counter: where are the staples of Mycenaean Greek? The conspicuous absence of terms like ko-wo for sheep or tai-rai, po for tripod, ubiquitous in Linear B tablets, makes a pure Greek origin feel like forcing a square peg into a round hole. Then there's the Minoan hypothesis, which posits the disk represents Eteocraton, the mysterious pre-Greek language of Crete's original inhabitants. This camp highlights the disk's buried context, found in a Minoan palace surrounded by linear tablets with symbols echoing motifs from Minoan art like bees and ships. If true, the disk could be our only key to unlocking a language lost when Greek invaders absorbed the island's culture. Yet critics note a glaring inconsistency: Linear A's organic, flowing symbols look nothing like the disk's rigid stamps, suggesting two entirely separate writing systems coexisting in one civilization. That raises an even thornier question: why would the Minoans need two scripts? The wildcard theory takes us across the Aegean to Anatolia, where the Luwian people used hieroglyphs shockingly similar to some disk symbols. Could this be a diplomatic message or a foreign scribe's work? The plumed head symbol, for instance, bears an uncanny resemblance to Luwian glyphs for deities. But if the disk is an import, why was it found in a basement storage room, not a royal archive? And why would Cretans stamp foreign text with such precision instead of simply carving it? Each theory unravels under scrutiny. The Greek link falters without Linear B's core vocabulary. The Minoan claim strains under the weight of Linear A's total dissimilarity. The Luwian connection dangles without evidence of broader cultural exchange. What's left is a maddening paradox: a script too deliberate to be random, yet too isolated to decode. The disk's language might not just be lost, it might represent a linguistic dead end, a fleeting experiment in communication that died with its creator. And that's the real tragedy. If we ever crack this code, we might not just read a message, we might hear the only surviving whisper of an entire way of thinking. Could the Phaistos disk be more than a message? Could it be a sacred object, a bridge between mortals and gods? Among the spiraling symbols, several leap out as possible religious icons. There's what looks like an altar with curved horns, a design eerily similar to Minoan cult objects found elsewhere in Crete. Nearby, a figure holds what might be an offering table piled high with gifts for the divine. Even the disk's circular shape feels ritualistic, like a prayer wheel meant to be spun, its words becoming a physical act of devotion. The strongest evidence comes from the Archaeological axe, a ceremonial bronze weapon discovered just 40 miles from Phaistos. Its blade bears inscriptions strikingly similar to the disk's symbols, including that same horned altar and plumed figure. Most scholars agree the axe was a votive offering, never meant for battle. If these shared symbols formed a sacred vocabulary, perhaps the disk served a similar purpose, a hymn stamped in clay, preserving words too holy to speak aloud. Some researchers even suggest it could be a dedication to the Minoan snake goddess, whose worship dominated Cretan religion. The bee symbol, repeated throughout the disk, mirrors cult imagery tied to her temples. Yet this theory stumbles on one glaring contradiction: the stamps themselves. Sacred texts in the ancient world were typically handwritten, each stroke a labor of love. Think of Egyptian Book of the Dead scrolls, painstakingly inked by priests, or cuneiform hymns molded line by line. Mass-producing a prayer with reusable stamps feels almost sacrilegious, like printing communion wafers on an assembly line. Unless, of course, the Minoans saw ritual differently. Perhaps the precision of stamping wasn't impersonal but intentional, ensuring no human error corrupted the divine message. Or maybe the disk wasn't meant for eternal worship at all, just a temporary charm fired to consecrate a single ceremony before being buried as an offering. The counterargument cuts deeper. If this was a hymn, why hasn't a single other example surfaced? Minoan shrines brim with votive figurines and frescoes, yet not one other stamped prayer survives. Even the Archaeological axe's symbols appear crudely scratched, not pressed with the disk's mechanical perfection. Unless the disk represents a lone experiment, a priest's ambitious attempt to standardize sacred words, its isolation makes ritual use hard to square. Here's where the mystery twists. Maybe the disk wasn't purely religious but something in between, a temple inventory, recording offerings with symbols instead of linear A's cramped tallies. Or a liturgical calendar stamped for durability as priests cycled through festivals. Without more examples, every interpretation feels like tracing constellations in static, the human mind craving patterns where none may exist. What lingers is the haunting possibility that we're not just deciphering a language, but an entire way of touching the divine, lost when the Minoan palaces burned. In the 1960s, a radical new theory emerged that dared to connect the Phaistos disk spiral to the night sky itself. Scholar S. Davis proposed that those 31 mysterious sections weren't words or phrases, but days in a lunar month, each symbol capturing a constellation's rise and fall. Picture it, a Bronze Age astronomer pressing stamps into clay to map the heavens, turning the disk into a portable celestial calendar. The plumed head symbol, Davis argued, wasn't just decoration. It was Orion's belt, its 3 stars mirrored in the 3 strokes of the design. Nearby, a shape resembling a fishhook might track the crescent moon, while branching lines echoed the twisting paths of comets. For a moment, this theory seemed to illuminate the disk's purpose. The Minoans were master navigators, their sailors crisscrossing the Mediterranean under star-studded skies. What if the disk was their astronomical almanac, predicting eclipses or marking planting seasons? The number 31 feels deliberate, close to the moon's 29.5-day cycle, with extra sections perhaps accounting for lunar phases. Even the spiral layout makes eerie sense. Just as stars appear to wheel across the night, the disk's symbols wind inward like a cosmic clock. Yet the cracks in this celestial theory soon appear. Crete's agricultural society relied on a 12-month solar calendar, synced to harvests and festivals. Why would they bury a lone lunar guide in a palace basement? And while some symbols loosely resemble constellations, others, like the shield or walking man, defy astronomical explanation. Most damning, the Minoans left behind frescoes teeming with nature scenes, dolphins, lilies, bulls in mid-leap, but not a single depiction of stars or planets. If they worshipped the night sky, why is their art silent on the cosmos? The final blow comes from timing. Davis's Orion alignment works for one specific epoch around 1700 BC. Shift a few centuries in either direction, and the stars no longer match. Wouldn't a sacred calendar need to endure beyond a single generation? Unless the disk was a failed experiment, abandoned when the heavens drifted out of sync, its celestial purpose remains as elusive as the constellations it supposedly charts. What lingers is the haunting beauty of the idea, a civilization so in tune with the universe they pressed the stars into clay. But like the rest of the disk's secrets, the truth may be forever just out of reach. What if the Phaistos disk wasn't a religious artifact or star chart, but an ancient power move? Picture this: among its swirling symbols, certain images stand out with violent clarity. A helmeted warrior appears multiple times, his sharp crest unmistakable. Nearby, what looks like a dagger or short sword is stamped with deliberate force. Then there's the so-called walking man, repeating in a pattern that feels oddly familiar, almost like the royal cartouches of Egyptian pharaohs, where a king's name was highlighted throughout official decrees. Could this disk be Bronze Age propaganda, a stamped proclamation from a Minoan ruler asserting dominance? The comparison to Mesopotamian boundary stones is irresistible. Kings like Hammurabi regularly erected stone monuments carved with conquest lists and divine endorsements, often decorated with weapon motifs to intimidate rivals. The disk's weapon symbols could serve the same purpose, a not-so-subtle reminder of military might. Even its circular shape might carry political weight. In a culture obsessed with labyrinths and spirals, the disk's design could symbolize unbroken authority, with the ruler's message winding endlessly inward. Some scholars suggest it commemorates a treaty or alliance, stamped in clay for ceremonial exchange between palaces. The repeated groups of symbols might outline terms, while the walking man represents a visiting dignitary's procession. But here's the problem: clay is fragile. If this was meant as a lasting declaration, why not carve it into stone like every other ancient empire? A fired clay disk seems shockingly ephemeral for something as weighty as a royal edict. Unless, of course, it was never intended to endure. Perhaps it was a temporary display, a speech rendered in symbols, held aloft during a public announcement before being archived. Or consider this: the disk stamps could signify mass production, with multiple copies distributed across Crete. If true, the surviving disk might be the lone survivor of a broader campaign, a ghost of forgotten political theater. The fragility raises an even darker possibility. What if the disk's message wasn't triumphant but desperate, a last-ditch decree stamped out as invaders closed in? Fired clay could be produced quickly compared to stone, and the Phaistos palace did burn around 1450 BCE. Maybe those weapon symbols weren't boasts of strength but pleas for defense. The truth may lie somewhere between. Rulers rarely limit themselves to one form of communication. The disk's uniqueness might reflect a fleeting experiment in political expression, abandoned when scribes returned to traditional tablets. Yet the absence of any similar finds gnaws at this theory. If the Minoans used stamped propaganda, where are the other examples? Unless this disk represents a brief, failed innovation, a ruler's attempt to standardize decrees that died with his reign. That's the haunting core of the mystery. Every interpretation feels plausible until you realize the disk refuses to fit neatly into any known box. It stands alone, a whisper from a labyrinth of lost intentions. Among the Phaistos disk's cryptic symbols, one in particular has fueled speculation about foreign origins: a distinctive profile of a human head marked with what appear to be dots or lines, often called the tattooed head. To some researchers, this symbol bears an uncanny resemblance to Hittite hieroglyphs from Anatolia, where similar dotted faces represented royal or divine figures. Could this be a clue that the disk wasn't Minoan at all, but a diplomatic dispatch from a distant kingdom? Imagine a Hittite envoy arriving in Crete, bearing this stamped clay message as a royal gift or treaty. The theory gains traction when you consider the Bronze Age's bustling trade networks. Egyptian gold, Cypriot copper, and Mycenaean pottery all crisscrossed the Mediterranean. Why not writing? Yet the logistics of this scenario unravel under scrutiny. By the time the disk was crafted around 1700 BC, the Near East's diplomatic lingua franca was Akkadian cuneiform, the era's equivalent of English for international business. Kings from Babylon to Thebes corresponded in this script, their scribes trained to wedge precise symbols into clay tablets. If the disk were a formal diplomatic message, why wouldn't the sender use this established system? Stamping an obscure local script would be like a modern ambassador delivering a treaty written in a vanishing tribal dialect instead of French or Arabic. Even more puzzling, the disk's symbols don't align neatly with any known Anatolian or Egyptian writing. The tattooed head may echo Hittite art, but the surrounding symbols lack parallels in their hieroglyphic repertoire. Then there's the question of medium. Diplomatic letters were typically written on foldable clay tablets or papyrus, materials designed for transport. The Phaistos disk, with its brittle, fired clay, seems ill-suited for long journeys unless it was crafted locally by a foreign scribe. But if so, where's the evidence? No Hittite or Egyptian artifacts were found alongside it, nor do Minoan records mention foreign scribes working in Cretan palaces. The disk's isolation becomes even stranger when you consider how ancient archives operated. Genuine diplomatic texts like Egypt's Amarna letters exist in multiples, filed meticulously for reference. A lone disk feels less like an official document and more like an anomaly. Perhaps the most damning counterargument lies in the symbols themselves. While the tattooed head grabs attention, it's surrounded by distinctly Minoan motifs: beehives, ships with crescent prows, shields with figure 8 designs, images deeply rooted in Cretan iconography. If this were a foreign text, why would it borrow so heavily from local art? Unless, of course, it represents a cultural hybrid, a message crafted by a bilingual scribe blending two worlds. But without a single other example of such synthesis, the idea remains a tantalizing what-if. The disk's mystery endures not because we lack theories, but because every explanation raises new questions, leaving us with a puzzle that resists even the most logical solutions. In 2014, a team of researchers decided to tackle the Phaistos disk's mystery with a tool the ancients could never have imagined: artificial intelligence. The Indigo project, led by computer scientist Dr. Gareth Owens, fed high-resolution scans of the disk into machine learning algorithms designed to detect patterns invisible to the human eye. What emerged was both groundbreaking and frustratingly incomplete. The AI identified clusters of symbols that behaved like syllables in known languages, with certain sequences appearing at the start of word-like groups, almost like grammatical prefixes. For the first time, technology confirmed what linguists had suspected. The disk script wasn't random. It had structure, rules, a logic that could theoretically be decoded. Yet here's where the cold reality of computational analysis collided with the messy beauty of ancient languages. Without a Rosetta Stone for the disk, some bilingual text or cultural context to anchor the symbols to real words, the AI could only map the script skeleton, not its soul. It was like hearing a song's rhythm but missing its melody. The algorithm could tell you that the sequence "Shield Bay Walking Man" appeared 3 times near the disk's outer edge, suggesting it might be a ceremonial phrase or royal title. But was it the Minoan equivalent of "Long Live the King" or a simple accounting term like 10 jars of honey? The machine had no way to know. This limitation reveals the heart of the challenge. Modern AI excels at finding patterns in data, but language isn't just patterns. It's meaning shaped by culture, history, and human experience. Consider Linear B, the script deciphered in the 1950s. Computers today could analyze its symbol frequencies in seconds, but it was a human insight, Michael Ventress's realization that certain repeating groups matched place names like Knossos, that finally cracked it open. The Indigo project faced the opposite problem. All the computational power in the world couldn't compensate for the lack of that one crucial link between symbols and the world they described. The most tantalizing output from the AI was its identification of potential starter signs, symbols like the plumed head or horned altar that often began word groups, much like capital letters in names or divine titles in Egyptian hieroglyphs. This hinted at a hierarchical message, perhaps naming deities or rulers before listing actions or offerings. But without knowing whether the horned altar represented a god, a temple, or even a geographic location, the interpretation remained stuck in the realm of educated guesses. What makes the disk such a formidable opponent for AI is its statistical oddity. Natural languages follow Zipf's law, a few words like the or and appear extremely frequently while most occur rarely. The disk's symbol distribution flattens this curve with no obvious high-frequency terms. This could mean one of two things. Either the text is so specialized, like a list of unique ritual items, that it defies normal language patterns, or the stamps weren't encoding speech at all, but something more abstract, like musical notation or mnemonic symbols for oral storytelling. The Indigo project ultimately proved both the promise and limits of technology in unraveling ancient mysteries. It gave us a scaffold proof that the disk's script operates by discernible rules, but left the words themselves hovering just out of reach. Perhaps future advances in quantum computing or cross-referential analysis with newly discovered artifacts will tip the scales. But for now, the disk guards its secrets as fiercely as ever, reminding us that some doors won't open with brute computational force alone. They require a key we've yet to forge, one that bridges the gap between sterile data and the living, breathing world of the Minoans. In 2008, a bombshell theory threatened to rewrite the entire Phaistos disk narrative, not as an ancient relic but as an elaborate hoax. Art historian Jerome Eisenberg dropped this startling accusation, suggesting the disk might be a 20th century forgery crafted by none other than its discoverer, Luigi Pernia. The motive: professional rivalry. Pernia was excavating in the shadow of Sir Arthur Evans, the superstar archaeologist who'd uncovered Knossos and monopolized Minoan fame. What better way to upstage Evans than to discover an artifact so revolutionary it would rewrite history? Eisenberg pointed to suspicious gaps in the record: no photographs of the disk in situ, no eyewitness accounts of its excavation, just Pernia's bare description in his field notes. And then there were the symbols themselves. Some looked oddly modern, like the shield resembling a figure 8, a design Eisenberg argued wouldn't appear in Crete until centuries later. But the hoax theory crumbles under scientific scrutiny. In the 1970s, researchers subjected the disk to thermoluminescence dating, a technique that measures when clay was last fired by analyzing trapped electrons. The results were unambiguous. The disk was heated over 3,000 years ago, placing it squarely in the Bronze Age. Forging that would require not just creating a fake artifact, but somehow artificially aging the clay's atomic structure, a feat beyond early 20th century technology. Even more damning for the forgery claim is the sheer complexity of the disk's production. Each of those 45 unique stamps would have needed to be meticulously carved, then pressed in perfect sequence without a single slip. Why go to such lengths for a prank when simpler fakes could achieve the same notoriety? The clincher lies in the stamps themselves. Modern microscopes reveal tiny, wear patterns on the edges of each symbol, microscopic cracks and compressions that suggest repeated use. A forger might replicate one stamp but 45, each showing distinct signs of aging. The probability stretches belief. Then there's the clay's composition, matching other Phaistos pottery but differing subtly from 20th century materials. If Pernia faked it, he'd need an encyclopedic knowledge of Minoan ceramics most archaeologists of his era lacked. Yet Eisenberg's skepticism isn't entirely without merit. The early 1900s were rife with archaeological frauds, from Piltdown Man to the tiara of Ciphers, as scholars raced for glory. Even Evans wasn't above reconstructing Knossos frescoes with liberal artistic license. But the disk's context tips the scales toward authenticity. Buried beneath volcanic ash layers matching the Santorini eruption, it lay in a sealed stratigraphic layer untouched for millennia. No forger could have predicted 20th century dating techniques or known which soil layers would appear undisturbed. What lingers isn't doubt about the disk's age, but why it provokes such extreme theories from star maps to hoaxes. Perhaps its very uniqueness makes it a lightning rod for controversy. In a world where we've decoded everything from Mayan glyphs to Neanderthal DNA, the Phaistos disk remains one of the last great resistors, a puzzle that refuses to surrender. And that's what keeps us coming back, not because we fear it's fake, but because we desperately want it to be real. A message across 3,500 years, waiting patiently for the right mind to listen. The Phaistos disk isn't just an archaeological curiosity, it's become a cultural phenomenon, leaping from dusty excavation reports into the global imagination. When Umberto Eco dubbed it a Minoan CD-ROM in his labyrinthine novel Foucault's Pendulum, he captured something essential about its mystique. Like a prehistoric hard drive, the disk seems to hold data just beyond our retrieval, tantalizingly close yet eternally encrypted. Eco wasn't alone in seeing the disk as a metaphor for humanity's hunger for hidden knowledge. Dan Brown's The Da Vinci Code might have skipped Crete, but the disk's spiraling symbols have inspired countless conspiracy theories, from Atlantean blueprints to alien communiques. It's the perfect blank canvas for speculation, ancient enough to feel oracular, cryptic enough to defy dismissal. Gaming worlds have eagerly embraced the disk's enigma. In Assassin's Creed Odyssey, players hunting for Isu artifacts, the series' fictional precursor Civilization stumble upon a dramatic reconstruction of the disk, glowing with otherworldly significance. The game's designers cleverly exploit its unresolved nature, weaving it into their lore as a fragment of lost technology. Even niche puzzle games like the Tolos principal feature Phaistos-like symbols, nodding to its status as the ultimate intellectual challenge. These digital appearances do more than entertain. They introduce millions to a real-world mystery, blurring the lines between archaeology and myth. Walk into nearly any major archaeology museum today, and you'll likely find a Phaistos disk replica staring back. The Heraclean Archaeological Museum in Crete displays the original like a religious relic, but copies have proliferated from London's British Museum to Chicago's Field Museum. Some are precise facsimiles, others take artistic liberties, reimagining the symbols in gold leaf or modern ceramics. In Athens' Numismatic Museum, a version stamped on a giant euro coin playfully questions what value we assign to the indecipherable. These replicas aren't just souvenirs, they're silent ambassadors of an unsolved puzzle, inviting visitors to join the centuries-long quest. No place has embraced the disk more fervently than Crete itself. It adorns everything from restaurant murals in Heracleon to beach towels in Ogyos Nikolaos, transformed into a symbol of regional pride. Local shops sell earrings shaped like its spirals, while street artists reinterpret its symbols in vibrant graffiti. The disk even stars in Crete's tourism campaigns, positioned alongside the Palace of Knossos as a must-see marvel. There's irony here. An object that may have been a one-off experiment in ancient bureaucracy now fuels an entire industry. Tour guides spin elaborate tales about its origins, knowing full well that mystery sells better than certainty. What makes the Phaistos disk endure isn't just its age or artistry, it's the way it mirrors our own era's obsessions. In a world drowning in information but starving for meaning, the disk represents the last great analog enigma. Podcasts dissected alongside Bermuda Triangle lore. TED Talks cite it as a lesson in intellectual humility. It's been referenced in songs from folk ballads to electronic tracks sampling scholars' frustrated rants. Even fashion designers have appropriated its symbols, printing them on runway dresses as if ancient script could lend modern fabric depth. The disk thrives precisely because it refuses resolution, becoming whatever each generation needs it to be, a riddle, a warning, or a promise that some secrets outlast time itself. Perhaps the most telling tribute came in 2019, when Google's Arts and Culture Lab used machine learning to translate the disk symbols into emoji. The result, a spiral of cartoonish birds, shields, and flowers, was delightfully absurd, but it revealed something profound. 3,700 years after some Minoan artisan pressed those stamps into clay, we're still trying to make their message ours, whether through algorithms, games, or museum gift shops. The disk's greatest legacy isn't in the answers it holds, but in the endless human impulse to keep asking. The Phaistos disk isn't alone in its defiance. History is littered with scripts that mock modern decipherment. Take the Voynich manuscript, that 15th century puzzle of floral illustrations and looping script tucked away in Yale's vaults. At first glance, the two couldn't be more different. One a medieval tome penned on vellum, the other a Bronze Age clay circle. But look closer, both share that hypnotic spiral structure, as if their creators believed truth could only be revealed by following a path inward. The Voynich's text curls around illustrations of plants that don't exist, while the disk's symbols spiral without illustration. Yet both seem to taunt us with the same question: is this language art or something in between? Then there's Rongorongo, the enigmatic glyphs carved into wooden tablets by Easter Island's lost civilization. Like the disk, these symbols were pressed rather than drawn, but here's where the similarities fracture. Rongorongo's chiseled figures cluster in repetitive sequences, almost like musical refrains, while the disk stamp patterns scatter more unpredictably. Statistical analysis shows Rongorongo's glyphs follow Zipf's law, that linguistic golden ratio where a few symbols dominate the text, just like common words in any language. The Phaistos disk flatly rejects this pattern, its symbols distributed with eerie uniformity, as if designed to obscure rather than convey. This divergence hints at something profound. When a script defies statistical norms, it's often because it wasn't meant to be read in the traditional sense. Consider quipu, the knotted strings used by the Inca. At first dismissed as mere accounting tools, we now suspect they encoded narratives, their colors and knot positions forming a three-dimensional language. Could the disk operate similarly? Its stamps might not represent phonetic sounds, but something more abstract: weights, musical notes, even ritual gestures. The Voynich manuscript's lush herbal pages suggest a practical guide. Rongorongo's wood tablets feel like genealogical records, but the disk, its isolation makes purpose slippery. Perhaps the most haunting parallel lies in what these scripts reveal about human ingenuity. The Minoans had linear for bureaucracy, yet crafted this stamped cipher. Easter Island's people lived in monumental isolation, yet developed their own writing system. The Voynich author, whether hoaxer or visionary, invented an entire botanical universe. Each represents a cognitive leap, a culture reaching beyond utility to encode meaning in ways we've yet to fully grasp. The tragedy isn't that we can't read them. It's that their creators' brilliance survives only as fragments, whispering across time in languages we may never truly understand. What sets the disk apart is its technological audacity. The Voynich and Rongorongo emerged from known literary traditions: medieval Europe's illuminated manuscripts, Polynesia's woodcarving arts. But stamping symbols into clay, that was revolutionary, a Bronze Age precursor to movable type that vanished without a trace. Its very existence suggests a fleeting moment when writing teetered on the edge of industrialization, only to collapse back into silence. We're left chasing shadows not just of lost languages, but of roads not taken in humanity's great communication experiment. Dr. Minas Tsukritsis and his team of experimental archaeologists took a radical approach to cracking the Phaistos disk's secrets, not with algorithms or dictionaries, but with fire, clay, and Bronze Age tools. Their workshop in Crete became a time machine, stripping away modern assumptions to ask one simple question: how would a Minoan artisan have actually made this? The answer lay in reconstruction. Using locally sourced clay matching the disk's composition, they fashioned replica stamps from materials available in 1700 BC: bronze for durability, wood for intricacy. Each symbol was hand-carved based on microscopic analysis of the original's indentations, revealing subtle details like the slight tapering of the bee's wings where the stamp was pressed deeper at one edge. The breakthrough came when they abandoned a long-held scholarly assumption that the disk was stamped into already fired clay, like a potter marking a finished vessel. As Tsukritsis' team worked, they noticed something counterintuitive. Pressing stamps into bone-dry clay caused fractures, leaving spiderweb cracks around the symbol's flaws absent on the original. But when they worked with freshly shaped wet clay, the impressions formed cleanly with the same smooth edges seen on the ancient disk. This tiny detail rewrote the production sequence. The Minoans hadn't stamped a hardened ceramic plate. They'd molded the disk shape and pressed the symbols in one continuous session, while the clay was still malleable before firing it to permanence. Timing proved everything. The team discovered they had roughly 45 minutes before the clay stiffened too much for crisp impressions, a window that would have forced the original artisan to work with disciplined speed. This urgency might explain the disk's occasional uneven spacing, where symbols crowd together as if the scribe rushed certain sections, even more telling. The stamps showed where patterns suggesting repeated use. When Tsukritsis recreated the full set, all 45 symbols, he found bronze stamps retained sharpness through hundreds of impressions, while wood versions dulled after just 20. If the Minoans used bronze, this wasn't a one-off project but a system crafted for multiple messages. The experiment's most startling revelation lay in the sound. Pressing a wooden stamp into wet clay produces a distinct thok, a soft, percussive note that echoes through the workshop. Multiply that by 241 impressions, and the disk's creation becomes almost musical, a rhythmic act that might hint at deeper ceremonial significance. Could the process itself have been part of the message's power, each stamp's sound marking a ritual cadence? Or perhaps the uniformity of pressure required to achieve clean symbols points to specialized training, a scribble technique passed down through generations? What emerges from Tsukritsis' work isn't just technical insight but a glimpse into the Minoan mind. The disk wasn't slapped together, it was crafted with precision tools by someone who understood both the medium's limits and its possibilities. Those 45 stamps represented an investment, weeks of labor to carve, test, and refine. This wasn't improvisation. It was bureaucracy meeting artistry, a system designed to convey something important enough to warrant its own technology. And that realization makes the disk's solitude all the more haunting. If stamping was this advanced, where are the other examples? Unless this lone disk is all that remains of a much larger story, one waiting beneath Crete's soil or lost forever to time. The clay remembers what we've forgotten. As Tsukritsis' replicas dry in the Mediterranean sun, they carry whispers of the original artisan's choices, the angle of a wrist, the weight of a hand. Archaeology often feels like sifting through ashes, but here, in the pressed symmetry of these modern symbols, the past feels startlingly alive, not as a puzzle to solve, but as a conversation stretching across millennia where every stamped curve says, "Listen." I was here. In 1911, American classicist George Hempel threw the academic world a curveball with his audacious claim. The Phaistos disk wasn't Minoan at all, but a cleverly disguised Greek cipher. His theory hinged on two radical ideas: that the symbols represented syllables rather than whole words, and that the message should be read backward, spiraling outward from the disk center like unfurling a scroll. By assigning phonetic values to each stamp based on their resemblance to Greek letters, Hempel produced a translation that sent chills down spines. The Cretan Zeus grants you strength. Suddenly, the disk wasn't just a bureaucratic record, it was a divine invocation, a whispered prayer to the king of the gods. But the cracks in Hempel's theory appeared under scrutiny. If this was a hymn to Zeus, why is the name Potnia, the Minoan supreme goddess, whose presence dominates linear B tablets, nowhere to be found? Her absence is deafening. In Knossos and Pylos, clay tablets invoke Potnia alongside Zeus as co-equal deities, her name etched repeatedly in contexts ranging from land allocations to sacrificial offerings. For the disk to ignore her entirely would be like a Christian text omitting mention of the Virgin Mary. Even more damning, Hempel's syllable assignments relied heavily on later Greek alphabets that didn't exist when the disk was fired. The Minoan Greeks of 1700 BC spoke Mycenaean Greek, a tongue closer to Homer's archaic dialects than classical Attic. His translation sounded elegant to early 20th century ears, but would it have made sense to Bronze Age worshippers? Then there's the backward reading itself, a concept foreign to known Minoan scripts. Linear A and B consistently move left to right, as do contemporary Egyptian and Mesopotamian texts. Spiral inscriptions from Celtic talks to Mesopotamian boundary stones overwhelmingly follow the natural coil inward. Asking ancient scribes to reverse this universal instinct feels like forcing the puzzle to fit. Hempel's supporters counter with the Boustrophedon style, an ancient writing method where lines alternate direction like an ox plowing fields. But no known examples of Boustrophedon involve spirals, nor do they require reading entire texts backward. The fatal flaw emerges when testing Hempel's method on the disk's other side. Applied consistently, his cipher produces gibberish, a jumble of syllables that neither resemble Greek nor form coherent phrases. Selective translation becomes the only recourse, cherry-picking symbols that fit while ignoring those that don't. Modern cryptographers call this the Texas sharpshooter fallacy, drawing targets around bullet holes after the fact. Perhaps the most telling critique comes from the disk's own materiality. If this were a sacred Greek text, why stamp it in clay rather than carve it in stone like contemporaneous Mycenaean dedications? The fragility of fired clay makes sense for administrative records, temporary tallies of grain or oil, but seems shockingly ephemeral for a divine message. Unless, of course, the disk was never meant to endure. Maybe it was a temporary charm, a prayer physically kneaded into being before being ritually broken. But then why laboriously craft 45 unique stamps for a single-use object? The contradictions multiply, leaving Hempel's theory tantalizing but ultimately unmoored. What lingers isn't just scholarly skepticism, but a deeper question about how we project our desires onto the indecipherable. Hempel saw Zeus because he was trained to see Greek gods in every Mediterranean relic. Today, we might laugh at his assumptions, but modern researchers bring their own biases, whether chasing AI patterns or astronomical alignments. The disk becomes a mirror, reflecting not just Minoan intentions but our own relentless need to make the unknown familiarly ours. And that's the real cipher we're still trying to crack. Among the many theories swirling around the Phaistos disk, one of the most compelling and controversial comes from geologist Eberhard Zanger. He proposed a radical idea. What if those mysterious symbols weren't Minoan at all, but Luwian? The Luwians, a Bronze Age people from what's now Turkey, used a hieroglyphic script filled with warriors, shields, and animal symbols that bear an uncanny resemblance to some on the disk. Take the shield sign, for instance. on the Phaistos disk, it's a figure-8 shape, nearly identical to Luwian glyphs representing fortresses or defensive structures. Then there's the arrow, a simple, slanted line on the disk that mirrors Luwian markings for weapons or conflict. Could these parallels be more than coincidence? Zanger's hypothesis gains traction when you consider the broader cultural web of the Bronze Age. The Luwians weren't obscure, they were major players in Anatolia, their influence stretching from Troy to the Hittite heartland. Trade routes buzzed between Crete and the Near East, with Minoan pottery turning up in Syrian ports and Luwian seals circulating in the Aegean. If goods could travel, why not writing? A Luwian merchant or diplomat might have carried the disk to Crete as a royal gift or treaty. Its stamped symbols designed to impress foreign eyes with technical sophistication. The spiral layout could even mirror Luwian ceremonial inscriptions, which often wound around sacred objects in intricate patterns. But here's where the theory hits a wall. For all the symbolic similarities, not a single Luwian artifact has ever been found in Crete. No seals, no tablets, not even a fragment of pottery with Luwian markings. This absence is deafening. Nearby Egypt and Mesopotamia left clear imprints on Minoan culture, from frescoes of griffins to imports of lapis lazuli, yet Luwian influence. Nothing even more damning is the timeline. The Phaistos disk dates to around 1700 BCE, while Luwian hieroglyphs only became widespread 500 years later. That's like finding a Roman coin in Cleopatra's palace, an anachronism that defies explanation. Zanger counters that early forms of Luwian script might have existed long before the surviving records, much like how proto-cuneiform predates the first recovered tablets. It's possible, but without physical proof, it's speculation. And then there's the disk's isolation. If Luwian scribes were active in Crete, why is this the only example of their work? Diplomatic texts like Egypt's Amarna letters typically survive in multiples, archived by both sender and recipient. A lone disk feels less like official correspondence and more like a fluke. Perhaps the most striking objection lies in the symbols themselves. While the shield and arrow resonate, other disk signs are distinctly Minoan: the bee, the ship, the helmeted warrior, all rooted in Cretan iconography. Luwian hieroglyphs, by contrast, favor lions, deities, and abstract geometric signs. The overlap is tantalizing but thin, like finding two words in common between unrelated languages. Unless the disk represents a hybrid script, a Luwian scribe borrowing Minoan motifs, or vice versa, the connection remains elusive. What's left is a theory as fragile as fired clay. The Luwian link offers a glimmer of logic, but without corroborating evidence, it's a bridge built on half-guesses. Yet Zanger's work does something vital. It forces us to look beyond Crete. The disk's mystery isn't just a local puzzle, it's a Mediterranean one, tangled in the threads of trade, war, and cultural exchange. And that's the real value of the Luwian hypothesis. Even if it's wrong, it reminds us that answers might lie not just in the soil of Phaistos, but in the wider world the Minoans once navigated. What if the Phaistos disk wasn't a message at all, but a Bronze Age spreadsheet? Among the swirling symbols, certain patterns leap out that have led some researchers down a fascinating path. Take the repeated appearances of the walking man, showing up 18 times across the disk's surface. Could this be a record of individual soldiers, workers, even sacrificial offerings? Or consider the shield symbol appearing in clusters, perhaps tallying armor or defensive units. This numerical theory suggests the disk's true purpose was utilitarian, its spirals holding records more practical than poetic. Supporters of this idea point to ancient accounting systems, where symbols often doubled as both items and numbers. In Mesopotamia, cuneiform tablets used the same wedge marks to count sheep as to write words, context determining meaning. The disc might operate similarly, with stamps like the bee representing actual hives, while their repetitions indicated quantities, 3 bees meaning 3 jars of honey, not the word honey written 3 times. The vertical dividing lines could separate entries like modern ledger columns. Suddenly, those mysterious groupings take on new significance, not syllables in a lost language, but line items in a Minoan inventory. Yet the theory stumbles when held against known Bronze Age numerical systems. Egyptian hieroglyphs used clear tally marks, 5 strokes for 5, a coiled rope for 10. Mesopotamian accounts separated commodities from numbers with distinct symbols. The disc lacks these universal accounting conventions. Its repetitions don't follow predictable numerical sequences, no clear groupings of 5 or 10 that would signal intentional counting. If this were a ledger, why make it so cryptically ornate? Linear tablets from the same era handle inventories with straightforward columns and totals. The disc's spiral layout feels unnecessarily complex for tracking grain or troops. Perhaps the most glaring hole is the absence of expected commodities. Minoan palace records consistently list olive oil, wine, and textile staples of their economy. Yet the disc symbols include none of these: no amphora for oil, no grape clusters, no loom weights. Instead, we get warriors and ships, items rarely inventoried in bulk. Even if some symbols represent abstract numbers, dots for units, lines for tens, the system doesn't map to linear A's well-documented numerals. That's not to say the numerical theory is worthless. The very existence of stamping suggests standardization, a hallmark of bureaucratic thinking, and the disc's durability, fired clay surviving where parchment would rot, hints at record-keeping intentions. Maybe it wasn't tracking mundane goods, but something more ephemeral: votes in a council, ritual participants, or even astronomical events. The repetitions might encode a system we simply don't recognize, like a coach's playbook using X's and O's to diagram formations. Without a Rosetta Stone for Minoan math, we're left guessing whether those stamped symbols are numbers, nouns, or something far more elusive, a code that conflates quantity and meaning in ways no modern ledger ever would. What lingers is the tantalizing possibility that we've been overcomplicating the disc all along. The greatest secrets sometimes hide in plain sight. Could the answer be as straightforward as a king's warehouse receipt, and yet, because we lack the key to its numerical shorthand, remain just as mysterious as any sacred hymn or star map? The disc's stubborn silence might not stem from esoteric content, but from our own inability to hear the mundane language of an ancient bureaucrat's record-keeping. One of the most poetic and controversial theories about the Phaistos disc comes from linguist Stephen Roger Fisher, who dared to ask, what if this isn't writing at all but music? Imagine those spiraling symbols not as words but as notes, the disc itself a Bronze Age songbook waiting to be played. Fisher's vision transforms the artifact into something extraordinary, a melody pressed into clay, each stamp representing a pitch on a lyre's strings, the concentric circles serving as early staves guiding the musician's hand. The idea is enchanting, a 3,700-year-old composition frozen in time, perhaps a hymn to the gods or a royal procession's fanfare. At first glance, the musical theory seems to fit the disc's structure beautifully. The 45 distinct symbols could correspond to different notes or chords, while the vertical dividers might mark rhythmic pauses or verse transitions. The spiral layout even mirrors how some ancient cultures notated music in circular patterns, like the walls of a shell. Fisher proposed that if you assign tones to symbols based on their frequency and position, you could reconstruct a lost Minoan melody, an auditory glimpse into a vanished world. But the cracks in this lyrical hypothesis appear when held against the realities of ancient music. First, no known Minoan instrument had the range to accommodate 45 distinct notes. The lyres depicted in Cretan frescoes typically had 7 to 9 strings, nowhere near the complexity required for Fisher's system. Even the most advanced instruments of neighboring civilizations, like Egyptian harps, rarely exceeded 12 notes. For the disc to encode 45 pitches would imply a musical sophistication unmatched for another millennium. Then there's the glaring absence of rhythm. Musical notation, from Babylonian tablets to medieval chants, always includes some indicator of duration, whether through spacing, recurring symbols, or contextual clues. The Phaistos disc's symbols repeat without any apparent tempo-related pattern, their spacing irregular in ways that defy melodic logic. If this were a song, it would be all pitches and no beats, like a pianist randomly striking keys with no regard for timing. The most damning counterargument lies in the disc's own craftsmanship. Stamping notes into clay would be an absurdly cumbersome way to preserve music when oral tradition was the norm. Ancient melodies were passed down through practice, not pressed into fragile ceramics. Even if the Minoans wanted to record music, why choose such a brittle, labor-intensive medium over something reusable like wax tablets? And why has no other musical artifact, not a single fragment, ever been found in Crete? Fisher's theory ultimately feels more like a beautiful thought experiment than a plausible explanation, yet it speaks to the disc's enduring power to inspire. Even if it's not a musical score, the idea reminds us that the past might communicate in ways we've yet to imagine, not just through words or numbers, but through the universal languages of art and sound. The disc's silence, after all, may not be emptiness, but a song we're still learning to hear. In 2018, linguist Dr. Gareth Owens made headlines with a bold declaration he'd cracked 50% of the Phaistos disc's code, revealing what he claimed was a prayer to a Minoan mother goddess. His translation hinged on linking recurring symbol sequences to known linear B words, particularly makar, a term associated with divine mothers in later Mycenaean Greek. According to Owens, the disc's text venerated a pregnant mother, possibly tying into Crete's well-documented worship of fertility deities. The media erupted, touting this as the long-awaited Rosetta Stone moment for the disc. But beneath the fanfare, scholars noticed something unsettling. Owens had quietly dismissed 20% of the disc's symbols as purely ornamental, setting aside entire sequences that didn't fit his narrative. This selective approach raises red flags. Ancient scribes rarely mixed functional text with meaningless decoration. Every stroke on ceremonial objects served purpose. Consider Egyptian temple inscriptions or Mesopotamian boundary stones. Even their decorative elements carried symbolic weight. If the Minoans went to the effort of crafting 45 unique stamps, why would they waste precious space on empty flourishes? Owens's dismissal of symbols like the shield and walking man as mere artistry feels uncomfortably convenient, like ignoring puzzle pieces that don't match your desired image. There's another problem with the makar connection. While linear B shares some symbols with the disc, the languages are separated by centuries. The disc dates to 1700 BCE, while linear B emerged around 1450 BCE as an adaptation of the still undeciphered linear A. Assuming word meanings remained static across these eras is like presuming Shakespearean English matches Old Norse. Even if makar existed in the disc's time, its meaning could have shifted dramatically, perhaps referencing a local chieftain rather than a goddess. Owens's theory leans heavily on later Mycenaean parallels, projecting Greek concepts onto a culture that may have understood divinity very differently. The most glaring issue emerges when applying his translation to the disc's entirety. If this were a prayer, why does the proposed text lack standard liturgical structures? Ancient hymns, from Sumerian temple chants to Vedic verses, follow predictable patterns, invocations, epithets, and requests. Owens's scattered makar sequences don't form coherent sentences, instead appearing in isolation like labels on a diagram. Without syntactic flow, the translation feels less like a deciphered message and more like a word search where only some letters are deemed relevant. What Owens's work does accomplish, however, is spotlighting how desperation shapes decipherment. When faced with an unyielding artifact, even serious scholars sometimes force patterns where none exist. His pregnant mother theory reflects our own cultural biases, a modern longing to see ancient spirituality through the lens of nurturing femininity. The disk may well be sacred, but until every symbol is accounted for, not just the conveniently aligned ones, we risk hearing only what we wish to hear from the silent clay. After all, true translation requires listening to the full message, not just the words we recognize. In 2020, cutting-edge micro-CT scans peeled back the layers of the Phaistos disk with unprecedented clarity, revealing secrets invisible to the naked eye for over a century. As the scanner's X-rays spiraled across the artifact, they captured something astonishing. Faint fingerprints pressed into the clay beside the symbols, preserved like ghostly signatures. But these weren't random smudges. The ridges and walls told a story of collaboration or perhaps correction. Analysis showed two distinct sets of prints, one with broader fingertip patterns consistently appearing near symbols that had been smoothed or adjusted, as if a second artisan had stepped in to fix errors mid-production. The implications are staggering. If the disk were merely a mass-produced item, stamped out like royal decrees or temple receipts, why the need for hands-on corrections? This wasn't a rote copy, it was a carefully monitored original, its creation involving at least two skilled individuals, one pressing stamps, another overseeing quality control. The micro-CT scans even revealed subtle variations in stamp depth, suggesting the first scribe occasionally tilted the stamps or pressed unevenly before the second intervened. One particularly telling section shows the B symbol stamped twice in quick succession, the second impression slightly offset to cover a blurred first attempt. Tool marks tell an equally fascinating tale. Tiny striations around certain symbols indicate the use of a fine bone or bronze stylus to refine edges after stamping, a level of post-production craftsmanship unheard of in simple administrative records. Even more revealing, these adjustments cluster on the disk's outer spiral, where symbols would be most visible when displayed upright, hinting at an object meant for public viewing rather than tucked-away record-keeping. The technology also exposed something scholars had long suspected. Every symbol was stamped individually, with no evidence of pre-arranged blocks or reusable lines of text. This wasn't primitive typesetting, but a painstaking, one-of-a-kind composition. The presence of human error and human correction transforms our understanding of the disk from a cold, bureaucratic tool into something deeply personal. Imagine the scene: two Minoan artisans hunched over wet clay, one pressing symbols with focused precision, the other's fingers darting in to adjust a misaligned stamp or smooth a rough edge, their collaboration frozen in time. What emerges from these high-resolution scans is a portrait of intention. The disk wasn't slapped together, it was crafted with deliberation, its creators willing to pause and perfect each element. That's not how cultures produce everyday documents, it's how they treat messages of extraordinary significance. Whether a royal proclamation, a sacred hymn, or something even more profound, the Phaistos disk now stands revealed not just as a linguistic puzzle, but as a moment captured in clay where human hands reached across millennia to say, "This mattered." Today's researchers aren't just staring at the Phaistos disk, they're attacking its mystery with tools Luigi Pernia couldn't have dreamed of. Take the Phaistos Disk Challenge, a global crowdsourcing effort that's turned decipherment into a digital treasure hunt. Thousands of amateur and professional linguists collaborate online, testing theories in real time, from comparing the symbols to ancient Anatolian scripts to mapping them against star patterns from 1700 BC. One volunteer even noticed that certain symbol sequences resemble the rhythmic repetition of epic poetry, sparking a fresh line of inquiry into whether the disk encodes oral traditions. The project's most fascinating twist, its leaderboard tracks which solutions gain traction, creating a living snapshot of collective intelligence at work. Meanwhile, labs are going microscopic. Neutron activation analysis has traced the disk's clay to a specific valley near Phaistos, confirming its Cretan origin but with a puzzle. The clay contains volcanic ash from the devastating Thera eruption, which reshaped the Mediterranean around 1600 BCE. This dates the disk to the eruption's aftermath, suggesting it might document the catastrophe or its aftermath. Even more tantalizing, the same technique detected trace metals in the symbol's grooves, possibly from bronze stamps. Researchers are now scanning museum collections for matching metal fragments, hoping to find the very tools that pressed the message into clay. Artificial intelligence is making its own leaps. A breakthrough algorithm developed at Oxford now cross-references the disk's symbols with those on the Archaeological axe, another undeciphered Cretan artifact, finding a 34% overlap in glyphs. The AI flagged a recurring sequence on both objects, a plumed head followed by branching lines. Could this be a royal title or divine name? The challenge is that neither text can be read, leaving the AI to sift through statistical echoes rather than concrete meanings. The next frontier might lie in the disk's physical crevices. High-resolution spectrometry has detected organic residues trapped in the stamp's deepest grooves, perhaps oils from the artisan's hands or remnants of ritual offerings. Upcoming DNA analysis could reveal whether these traces contain genetic material, potentially linking the disk to specific individuals or even revealing how it was used. Was it handled ceremonially, anointed with sacred substances? Each microbe clinging to its surface could rewrite our understanding of its purpose. What unites these modern approaches is their willingness to embrace uncertainty. Where early scholars sought a single definitive answer, today's researchers are mapping probabilities, testing dozens of scenarios simultaneously. The disk may never surrender its secrets entirely, but with each technological stride, we're learning to ask better questions. And sometimes the questions themselves are the real discovery. The Phaistos disk isn't just an ancient curiosity, it's a seismic rift in our understanding of human innovation. If those stamped symbols could speak, they might shatter centuries of historical consensus. Consider this: we've long credited 15th century Germany with the revolutionary invention of movable type. Yet here's a Bronze Age artifact using precisely the same principle over 3,000 years earlier. The implications are staggering. While Gutenberg's press birthed the mass production of knowledge, the Minoans may have stumbled upon an even more extraordinary idea: standardized communication through reusable symbols, only for it to vanish in the ash of their collapsing civilization. What if this lone disk isn't an anomaly, but a glimpse of a lost technological path? The literacy question cuts even deeper. Conventional wisdom paints the Minoans as bureaucratic elites, their linear a script reserved for palace accountants tracking jars of oil and bushels of grain. But stamped symbols change the game. Unlike hand-carved inscriptions that demanded years of scribble training, stamps could theoretically be used by anyone taught their basic arrangement. Was the disk an experiment in democratizing writing? A Minoan merchant might not master the flowing curves of linear A, but pressing pre-made symbols into clay. That's a paradigm shift. Suddenly, literacy isn't confined to temple scribes. It's within reach of sailors, artisans, even farmers. The absence of other stamped texts could mean the experiment failed, or it might hint at a darker truth, that the Minoan world burned before the idea could spread. Modern cryptography sees the disk's echo in every unbroken code. The same statistical patterns that frustrate linguists, those flat symbol frequencies defying natural language rules, mirror techniques used in today's encryption. Just as the disk's creator might have deliberately scrambled meaning to limit readers, contemporary cybersecurity experts layer complexity to shield data. There's poetic symmetry in how an ancient artifact challenges us with the same problems we face in the digital age. how to preserve knowledge while controlling access, how to balance innovation with secrecy. Perhaps most urgently, the disk embodies the fragility of cultural memory. Of the 6,000 languages spoken today, linguists predict 90% will vanish within the century. The Minoan language met a similar fate, leaving the disk as one of its last untranslated whispers. Deciphering it wouldn't just solve a puzzle, it would resurrect a strand of human thought long presumed lost. In an era where languages disappear faster than species, the disk stands as both warning and inspiration, a testament to what endures and what slips forever beyond reach. Solving it wouldn't just rewrite history, it would remind us how much still hangs in the balance. After more than a century of scrutiny, the Phaistos disk remains archaeology's ultimate riddle, a clay circle that refuses to surrender its story. The theories are as varied as they are fascinating. Could it be a celestial calendar, the stamp patterns aligning with lunar cycles, a Bronze Age astronomer's attempt to chart the heavens in spiraling symbols? Or perhaps a sacred hymn pressed into clay to honor a forgotten goddess, the bee and altar symbols whispering of rituals lost to time? Then there's the political angle, a treaty or royal decree, stamped with authority to declare alliances or threats, those helmeted warriors and ships standing as emblems of power. Each explanation glimmers with possibility, yet none fits perfectly. Like trying to assemble a puzzle with half the pieces missing, the gaps in our knowledge leave room for wonder. This isn't just academic debate, it's a testament to the human craving for mystery. There's something thrilling about an artifact that defies even our most advanced tools, reminding us how much history still hums with secrets. The disk's enigma lingers not because we lack curiosity, but because it forces us to confront the limits of our understanding. Every failed decipherment, every contested theory, underscores a humbling truth. Some voices from the past speak in tongues we haven't yet learned to hear. So where do we go from here? The conversation isn't over, it's evolving. Cast your vote in the poll below. Is the disk a calendar, a prayer, or something even wilder? And if you're hooked on ancient mysteries, let's tackle the Vinca symbols next, another script waiting to be cracked. As archaeologist Louis Goddard once mused with a mix of frustration and awe, the disk is a message we're just not worthy of reading it yet. That's the magic of archaeology's great unsolved puzzles. They're not just relics, they're invitations, an outstretched hand from the past daring us to keep searching.